Okay, so let's talk about what's actually going to be on the exam. So there's going to be 5 questions. Each of them, well, most of them are going to be multiple parts, similar to what you saw on the exam we had before spring break in class. So question number 1 is going to cover material up through 2.5, section 2.5. So that's sort of the early part of the course, like maybe the first month or so. So included in that, there's stuff like probabilities involving intersection and union, complement. Remember that stuff. There's going to be stuff like conditional probabilities. So I'm not going to ask about all this stuff, but this is the type of stuff which is sort of fair game for that question. So conditional probabilities, expected value, also known as the mean, variance, which we all use to find standard deviation, joint distributions, so where there's sort of 2 different variables you're keeping track of at the same time. And in the joint distribution section, there was the conditional probability when you know the answer to one of the distributions, but there was also something called marginal probability. So that's like if you had a probability mass function that told you the probabilities of each of the combinations of results, then let's say that you only really care about one of them. So, like I know the probabilities for whether like for male and female and freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, if I pick a random Shippensburg student. So let's say that all I actually want to know is the probabilities for their class year. So that would be the marginal probability. Basically, I just have to add up the male and female numbers for each year to find this sort of the total for the one of the 2 variables. That's what I mean by marginal probability. Then there was also connected to joint distributions, there was covariance and correlation, which was basically just a measurement of how closely connected the 2 variables were. And that was basically up through 2.5. So there's a lot of topics in there. I'm only going to ask one question on all of this stuff, though. There were quite a number of formulas that we had in those sections, so you would want to have those formulas available. Don't waste time flipping through the textbook. Prepare yourself a set of like notes that you can quickly go to get the formulas you need. There is some stuff that we did in these chapters that I am definitely not putting on the exam. So I am not going to ask about the median and quartiles and any of that other stuff that like sort of replaces the mean and the variance using sort of this other method of the upper half and lower half. We spent a day on something called moments, which was kind of like a generalization of variance. I'm not going to ask about that on the exam. And we spent like kind of half a day on Chebyshev's inequality. I'm not going to be asking about that on the final exam. Okay, so that's the first question. The formulas in there are, some of them are like mostly they're involving like fractions and stuff. You're not going to be able to like easily type stuff like the union and intersection symbols. I guess you could just use a capital U for the union symbol. Intersection symbol will be a little trickier to do. I set D2L so that you would have some options for fonts and things. I don't know how many symbols you'll be able to put in though, so it might not be easy to put in intersection. But beyond not having the intersection symbol, most of the formulas were just fractions, and that shouldn't be too hard to type. I think that we can type a fraction. Okay. So question 2. Question 2 is sort of the other question where I'm going to ask about probability stuff. So this is the 3.1 up to 5.1, which is basically the rest of the probability part of the class before we transition to stats. So this is all the distribution things, so like the binomial distribution, the negative binomial distribution, geometric distribution, basically all the distributions that we talked about. Poisson, exponential, also known as inter-arrival time, the normal distribution, and lastly, the uniform distribution. I guess we did uniform before we did normal, so maybe I'll put that before it on the list. Okay. So this was like, a chunk of this was at the end of that first exam we did in class, and a chunk of it was at the beginning of the first exam I gave through D2L. So it was sort of straddling spring break. There are more formulas in this section. So I guess we should talk about how you might be able to type things in. So for example, if like what I would have done for choose, like a lot of these formulas for binomial and negative binomial and stuff, they involve the choose symbol. So if I wanted to do, say, like 5 choose 2, you might not be able to type that into D2L so easily, but you could write 5C2, and that would make sense. Another thing that there's going to be a lot of is there's going to be stuff like 0.93 to the power 5 or something like that. You could instead write that as just like 0.93 and then this upper caret symbol with a 5, and I would understand what that meant. So, just use these upper caret symbols for powers. Use this notation 5C2 or like NCK or something for N choose K. And that should cover most of the things that might be a little bit tricky to type in. I think that typing shouldn't be too bad after that. Some of these, if you needed to compute them, would involve possibly doing an integral. I'm going to go out of my way to not ask you questions where you have to write down an integral and then do calculus, because you're just not going to be able to show your work for those ones. So if you're wondering how you could write an integral in D2L, I'm going to try to make that not come up. I already set the final, and I didn't really think about this carefully before then, but I'm pretty sure there's none where you would have to do an integral. Yeah, but there's definitely choose and powers that are going to come up from time to time. Okay, so that's the first two questions. This stuff is sort of like the before stat stuff. Most of this was covered before we were kicked out of school. Okay, and this video is running a little long, so I'll talk about the rest of the questions in a third video.